good noon, I guess. It's 12. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the Enneagram. And for those of you that don't know what the Enneagram is, it is a personality assessment. And there's a lot of reasons why I prefer this personality assessment over other ones. And I'll get into that in a few moments. But first, if you've never taken the assessment, there is a link here in order to take that assessment. I have it set up today that you won't necessarily need to take the assessment. What I want you to do is just kind of try on each of the types. So there's 9 types, and we'll go through each of those types. It is an introduction today, so I'm not going to go into extreme detail, but this could be really like a 2-day course just on the amount of information that the Enneagram has to offer. But for your reference, there is a link there, and I can also send a few other links as well for assessments, because there's a few, and there's some I prefer more than others. The reason I have this link in here is if you want to use it right now, you can click on it and it's pretty quick. So the other ones look a little prettier. This one's quick. So that's at eclecticenergies.com. But Truity is another one. Truity.com is another one that you could use. Okay, so we're going to just go ahead and go through the types. So it is separated, the Enneagram, and I probably should have really had an actual diagram here. I'm not entirely sure why I don't have that. Give me 1 minute. I have it on the cover, just not on the actual presentation. So let me just click on that. There we go. And hopefully that works. Okay. So this will take maybe a second to load. So there are 3 different parts, and obviously 9 types. So when I say parts, it is divided by 3. So the 8, 9, and 1 are the gut space. So what that means is it's really influenced. The people that tend to be 8s, 9s, and 1s tend to be influenced on intuition. So what their gut feeling is saying, they're led by that, kind of led by the physical part. So those are different. I'm just going to say these are very different in how they interact with that. Then the 8 tends to be outward. And so they deal with a lot of things in an outward way. The 9 actually deals with things by not dealing with it. It's almost as if, like, for instance, anger doesn't exist for this number. They're so blind to it. And the 1 tends to have that anger or negative feelings toward themselves. So 8 tends to be outwardly angry, and 9 tends to not acknowledge at all the anger that's in them, and 1 will turn it against themselves. Now for the 2, 3, and 4, those belong in the heart category. So with that being said, they're in more of the, I don't want to say like caring space, but 2s on one hand want to be nurturing towards others. The 3 tends to not really acknowledge vulnerability or closeness. And 4 tends to be very internal with their feelings. Sort of this idea of nobody understands me, I'm alone in the world. And so their feelings are really inward as well. Then the 7, 6, and 5 are in the head space. So they tend to be thinking a bit. 7 externalizes it. So 7s tend to be very active and tend to want to distract themselves. 6 wants to avoid any sort of danger or fear. 7 kind of goes towards it because it's fun and exciting and takes them out of pain. And 5 wants to protect themselves from pain, but 5 wants to protect themselves from pain by using knowledge. So those are the subtypes, and hopefully that all makes sense. Feel free to ask questions if you need to. And I'm going to go back to the storyboard. All right. So we're going to go into these subtypes a little bit more in depth. So this is really an important piece of the Enneagram. So these are a little different than what I was just talking to you about. This is where I want you to think about, where's my tendency towards? So the self-preservation tends to be dominant because they're trying to protect themselves. So you might protect yourself based on what childhood was like. You might want security, comfort, health. That you might be the person then that always has a snack with them, that carries a water bottle with them at all times, really paying attention to, I want to be safe. I want to look at what I'm going to be comfortable with. How do I make sure I'm comfortable? Then we go into the social subtype. And with a social subtype, this is geared more towards people that feel are looking at themselves within a group. So the group becomes very important. They tend to be more social, and they're centered around interpersonal relationships. So they're really trying to be accepted and looking for a sense of belonging. The third one is intimacy, or the sexual subtype. Now, the word sexual isn't used in this way as in sex. What it means is the chemistry. So somebody might be more likely to have one best friend and have that best friend all through their life, or really wants to be in a relationship above all else. They might be a person that tends to leave their social their social space, leave it behind when they join a relationship. So this is really important because they're driven by the deep connections and personal transformation. So that is the difference between the social and the intimate. So it would be, instead of thinking about how am I within this group and this group is making me feel good and belong, this person will tend to feel like one person makes them feel like they belong. Now, out of those 3 subtypes, just try and think about for yourself which one you might fall into. And none of them are good or bad. They just are. So it's what's driving us. What do we feel the best in? Dimensions for using the Enneagram. So I'd mentioned that I was going to talk about why I like the Enneagram as far as personality tests. And the reason I like it is because it talks about the physical, the mind, and spirituality. So it's not just one thing. It's not just how somebody might interact with a social group. This is our complete self. So that to me really separates this personality test. The other part about it is that it really views the personality as equal, having both strengths and weaknesses, which is really important because when we're trying to learn about ourselves, it doesn't help us to think that, hey, the person that did this assessment has a clear favorite. This is not the case in the Enneagram. Every part has, or every type has several of both. So it's important for us to know, okay, this might be our strength, but guess what? We have some work to do. The other part about the Enneagram, which we're not going to go into today, but it does talk about different levels of healthiness, which is extremely important when you're creating goals for yourself. I use this with clients really frequently because this is something that they can use when they decide they're done with counseling or they're feeling better and they don't want to do counseling, or something else happens. Maybe they move away. Something occurs where they can't afford to come to counseling anymore. This is something that they can take with them, and it's going to be useful throughout their whole life. So it's not just, here's my goal for my 20s, or here's my goal for the next 5 years. This goes on throughout someone's life. And, it might seem like how is that possible? Because we change so much as people, but it includes movement. So we aren't going to go through the movement part today either, just because, again, that takes up a lot of time and it can get very confusing. But hopefully we can do another one that goes into more depth. But you can move towards a different number when you're feeling stressed, and you can move towards a different number when you're feeling safe. So that's when it starts to get really cool, because you can notice, like, this is my general personality on the day to day. Oh, but when I'm really tend to go. So the last one is that it allows for the core motivations and behavior. There's two parts to this motivation piece, and the first is desire. So what are you desiring? What are you trying to get to? And the other part is fear. So what is our biggest fear? When we're going through the Enneagram today, I want you to think about, do I match up with the fear? Do I match up with the drive or the desire? Because in reality, there's one major fear and one major desire in each of us. Of course, there's more than that around it, but finding that can really tell us what's driving the behavior. So if there's something we don't like or something we do like, why are we doing it? So again, I like this because somebody could use the Enneagram and really start to discover themselves, even if they don't have access to a therapist. And it can be a great exercise as a therapist to be using in order to get to have the homework with a client actually being done, because you can look, okay, here's the book, here's the information. How do I feel about these things? Do they match up? Okay, let's get to the different parts. So the first three parts, like I mentioned, it relates to the gut, relates to intuition, and talks a lot about how anger is felt. So the first one we're going to do is the challenger. So again, through each of these, I want you to try them on and see if this sounds like you. What also can be helpful when learning a personality test, or really anything in relation to psychology, is thinking about people that you know and people that you have relationships with, and seeing, okay, does this person fall into this category? Do I fall into this category? Do also want to warn you never to give somebody a type. This is something they have to do on their own. Somebody can't determine what somebody else's motivation and biggest fear and biggest desire, what those are. Somebody has to do that for themselves. So it can be very invasive if you try to tell somebody you're a challenger. And even if you know that they're a challenger and they've agreed to it, I do also want to let you know that that might not always be something that a person is willing to talk about, because it can be vulnerable to say, this is my type. And then you do something wrong, you make a mistake, and then your partner or your friend says, yeah, that's because you're a challenger. Reason being is it makes it something that is not changeable. And the whole purpose of this assessment is to understand that we are able to change and grow. Yet this is our natural tendency, but with that becomes a lot of ability to change and grow. And it doesn't feel really good when somebody thinks that we can't make changes. All right, so the challenger, the greatest strengths are assertiveness, protective, and decisive. And their weaknesses tend to be in the aggressive, confrontational, and controlling side. Now, remember with the challenger, they tend to be outward with feelings of anger. So that's why it does sometimes come out as aggressive or confrontational. But it's important to know, if you know a challenger, that they actually feel closest to people when they are challenging someone. This information has been a game changer for so many people that I work with, because people that they've thought were just being obstinate, they could reframe that person into, oh, they're coming toe to toe to me because they respect me and they want to challenge me and they want to be close to me. And a way that they become close is by challenging. It really has changed a lot of mindsets for people to think about it in that way. The challenger's greatest desire is maintaining control and protecting others. So you might notice that this person, or yourself, if you're in this category, has a desire to protect the underdog. So they might be somebody that takes let's say somebody's new in the area. They might take that person under their wing. They might make sure that that person is feeling comfortable and won't let anything happen to them. Like if someone's teasing that person that they feel is maybe not as strong as them, they'll stand up and they'll say no. Another image that might be useful is thinking about like the mama bear mode. That aggression can be really used in a positive way of protection. And so that can be the challenger's greatest asset, is being somebody that would be an advocate for people that need help. So that with the challenger, the other piece is that they're looking to make changes. They're also kind of, if you think about like an adolescent is in a space of, there's something wrong with what's happening here. Let's change it and let's try to challenge at every single moment. That's what the challenger is trying to do in a way, and that is to make sure that they have control over the situation. And then in turn, if they feel like they have control over the situation, they feel safe. The challenger is also very decisive, which can be really, really beneficial, especially if they're paired in a relationship with somebody that's not decisive. Those quick decisions can be really, really powerful. And people will often think this person has a ton of confidence and I don't have to worry. I feel safe with them. So that's another thing, that a lot of times people feel pretty safe with a partner that's a challenger. Greatest desire, like I said, maintaining control and protecting others. So their control is really how they feel safe, and they're looking to maintain that control in any situation. Greatest fear. So the greatest fear is being vulnerable or weak. So they won't really show this. It is maybe in a deep personal relationship that will come out, but in general, they aren't going to be showing that vulnerability to anyone. And it can be really hard to get out of that space. I just read Minka's book. What is it called? I think Tell Me Everything. I'm probably going to get the name of that wrong. I'll link it in at the end. But she is in that role. She does not want to be vulnerable. And she kind of goes through her life story of what that was like and how that impacts relationships, because it does. If you're not able to be vulnerable, you're going to have a hard time with those really close relationships. All right. So went through this already when I went through the list, but basically they're confident, decisive, protective, strong will, and the ability to stand up for what they believe in, excellent advocates and protectors. So I guess I did that by memory. So that's good. All right. The negative piece, they can be domineering and confrontational and not everybody appreciates that. Some people do. Other challengers appreciate it, but not somebody that is intimidated easily or might be in a different number, like nines. They might not particularly like how confrontational an 8 can be, because as we'll find out, the 9 doesn't like any sort of conflict. So the other thing, they can be insensitive to others' feelings and not know their own control. Or I'm sorry, they might not know their own power. So I always think it's important to give people to what the types are. And Martin Luther King Jr., Winston Churchill, and Serena Williams are all challengers. And basically it's that competitive spirit. It is, for Martin Luther King, obviously, that advocacy for civil rights. So really saying, I don't like how this is going, and I'm going to change it to make sure that people are safe. So that's that idea. Now, the challenger in sports, that is more of the competitive nature. So number 9, the peacemaker. So the peacemaker, this one's an interesting one. As we go through all of the different types, the peacemaker is the one, if you don't think you are any of the types, or I'm sorry, if you think you are every single one of the types, you're probably a peacemaker. And that is because the peacemaker tends to identify with every single person, which is a gift in some ways. And, we'll talk about how that might be a weakness in other areas. So they tend to be easygoing, agreeable, and empathetic. The weakness is that they tend to procrastinate. They want to avoid conflict and can be complacent. So they might not be wanting to move very much. I'm a 9, so I'm going to put that out there. So when I say this, I'm kind of talking about myself. The sloth is the animal that they use when they describe the peacemaker, because of the slow movement, and there is not a ton of like aggression or any sort of like, let's go get it. And it isn't until the 9 becomes really clear on the direction of themselves that they are able to access that energy of moving forward and doing things. So keep that in mind. That it doesn't mean that you're never doing anything. It just means that sometimes it's hard to make movement because you like things the way it is. Like, so calm and peaceful. The greatest desire is creating harmony and inner peace. So this means that the greatest desire of a peacemaker is to not have worries, to not have conflict that's going internally or externally. So both parts. I don't want there to be any fighting going on in the room, and I definitely don't want to have a conflict that leaves me ruminating in things. So that does not create peace, and it does not create harmony. The greatest fear is a loss of connection or inner stability. So you might find that if you're a 9, you might agree. That goes back into the agreeable part. And the underlining fear with that is that if you don't agree and if you aren't aligned, then you will lose that person. You will lose connection. I must agree in order to connect. Loss of inner stability. So, one thing that I do, and like I said, I'm a 9. One thing I do is the practice of yoga every night, and I need that, and that is part of the family all knows that. But that is so that every night I have this place I can go back to that is quiet and calm, and it's only for like 10 minutes, really not a long time. But I want to make sure that I am internally stable as much as I can, and that I have that internal peace. And it is a beautiful part of my day for sure. All right. So peacemakers are accepting and supportive and calming. You might see them most likely in a therapeutic type field. Leaders can sometimes be peacemakers. They are able to see both sides of an issue. And they're also able to be really great negotiators or mediators. So somebody that might be trying to make a deal, they might be the person that you reach out to say, okay, we are struggling here to figure this out. Can you help us compromise? And what they'll do, and I do this in marriage counseling quite a bit, is I have absolutely no issue seeing where both of my clients are when they come in for couples counseling. That is never, ever an issue. Can 100% see where somebody's coming from if I know their background and I know their history. And there isn't any judgment in it at all. And so being in that space of a mediator, you're able then to say, okay, I get why you might be frustrated and why you did that. And I get why you might be feeling like you don't want to be around that person. Both of those things make sense. And now if I can get them to understand where each other's coming from, then usually there can be some movement, because it's not about who's right or wrong anymore. It's about, hey, I get how you'd feel that way. I get how you'd feel that way. That wasn't intentional. That wasn't intentional. Now where can we go from here? And it's a beautiful process. I love it. That's why I like couples work so much. But it's not really for everyone, because as anyone that talks to somebody that's married, you can very much see how you might be aligning to one person versus another. So having that ability to see both sides can be crucial for couples work. All right. Some negative sides about 9. Oh, I wish that there weren't any, but there are. Tend to avoid conflicts and more important issues. So there's a tendency to put your head in the sand and pretend something's not going on just so that you can be in peace. It might be neglecting your own needs or desires because peace becomes more important. This is so vital if you are a 9 to focus in on if you do this, because my guess is that you do, that you will put yourself behind other people. And if we're going to a restaurant, I'm definitely not going to be the one that says this is where I want to go. It isn't unless somebody kind of pushes and says your view is important. I want to know that you want to go where we're going. Then I will feel like, okay, that makes sense, and I will let you know. But I truly in my heart don't care. I'm happy to just be going out to dinner. But anyways, that is one of the things that can come up for people. And sometimes that idea of I don't care what happens really means I don't feel like I matter. So I don't matter, or the place we eat doesn't matter. I don't matter. So that can be a hard thing to reconcile, that is where that's coming from, because most people, if you ask them straight out, are going to say, no, that's not where that comes from. But that's where what is underneath it all. It is what is most important is that everybody's feeling good. It's not that I want something different. Okay, some examples of the peacemaker: Dalai Lama, Ellen Page, and Keanu Reeves. So speaks for itself with the Dalai Lama. He's dedicated to peace and harmony, and he's obviously focused in on peace and inner peace as well. All right, we're going on to type 1, the reformer. Again, feel free to put anything in the chat if you have any questions. So the reformer, this is an interesting one, because the more I feel like, anyways, the more that I have been learning about the Enneagram, the more that I will see reformer type personalities. And there's definitely a lot of good in the reformer spot, and it can be tricky for the reformer for themselves. It tends to be more of a, I mean, it can go either way, I suppose, but it tends to be more difficult internally because they tend to be critical of themselves. So the strengths of the reformer, sometimes they call it the perfectionist. I just feel like that's not quite it. So I do prefer using reformer, because it is about the self-discipline. It's about being responsible. It's about being really aware of what you are doing and how things, quote unquote, should be done. So it's not about necessarily the perfectionist piece. They tend to be perfectionistic, but that's not exactly what is always happening there. Again, the weaknesses: critical, perfectionistic, and judgmental. So that judgmental and critical part tends to come out towards other people a bit. And one thing I always just say about if you're in a relationship with somebody that's a reformer, just remember that they are 10 times harder on themselves than they are to you, which may or may not be helpful, but it's important to note that there is a huge tendency for that inner critic to be very loud internally. Greatest desire is striving for perfection and integrity. So again, why I didn't like the perfection piece is because it can be the integrity piece that's showing up even more so than any sort of striving for perfection. So that idea of I'm going to do the right thing no matter what that means. Where it becomes tricky is sometimes doing the right thing isn't quite the right thing. Depending on what all happens. Greatest fear: making mistakes and being corrupt or unethical. So what I tend to see is making mistakes tend to be the biggest thing. Not necessarily feeling like they're corrupt. I think that's kind of a big word, but that making a mistake makes me a bad person or irresponsible. So people of this type tend to be principled, purposeful, self-controlled, and they do strive for self-mastery, are very conscientious, and seek to do things the right way. So this might be somebody that tends to be in a field that takes all of the principle, purposeful aspect and uses that in their job. So it could be, a lot of doctors might fall into that, pharmacists might fall into it, where there is this somewhat almost, I don't want to say like 100% clear, but there is a very clear procedure to things. And so they might tend towards any occupation that has that clear procedure. Teachers tend to be in that area as well. The downside can be that they're too controlling and too judgmental. They might be the person that's saying you're doing that the wrong way, or don't forget this, or that doesn't make sense. Why are you doing it that way? Which can be difficult for somebody else that just does things a different way. And it can be really hard for them to see why somebody would do things a different way that wasn't maybe as efficient. And one of the things that can be very frustrating in a relationship because of that part. So that ability for that person to start working on self-compassion and being more empathetic to themselves, that will make a huge difference in their relationship, because the more that they are doing that work, the more it will also affect positively their partner. Okay, some examples. We got Oprah, Nelson Mandela, and I have my glasses on, but I can't see very good. So we have a lot of different people that are in this role. So it does, again, have to do with doing the right thing, or what they feel would be the right thing. And it is a lot of times social justice comes up as part of what their role might be. The heart. All right, so we're moving on to the heart. Oh, no, we're not. That's a slide that fell in the wrong spot. We're going into the 2, 3, and 4, which is, we are going to the heart. Sorry, we are going to the heart. I just wrote the wrong numbers down. All right, so the helper: strengths, empathetic, caring, and nurturing. Weaknesses: overly sacrificing, manipulative, and possessive. And the greatest desire is feeling loved and appreciated. And being unwanted or unloved is the greatest fear. So the strength being that that person tends to be very caring and they tend to be very nurturing. The weaknesses go into the space of being manipulative. They might do helping things in order to get love. So that's where this can be kind of a tricky one and a hard thing to accept, that it might be the reason that they might be doing all of these caring things is because they're actually trying to get love. And it can look very unselfish, but there is some motivation there that's directed towards themselves. Like, if I do this, I will be loved. And their greatest fear is, of course, then not being loved and being unwanted. So they tend to be generous, people-pleasing, and possessive. So they tend to be very giving, and tend to be focused in on other people's needs. You will notice this person because they will be the first one when you enter a party to come and see if you need anything. They will also be the first to ask if you need help. They demonstrate an eagerness to help, and they might go really out of their way to help somebody. So that is obviously a very wonderful quality, and they can be a really great friend to have. There are the weaknesses of this type, though, as well. They often struggle with the fear of abandonment or rejection, and so they are actually compensating by using they're compensating by using their helping strategies to be able to be close with people and potentially control people. So you might take a deep breath if you're in this one, because that can be very shocking. And if you are a 2, that doesn't feel good to hear that. But bear with me with that. That's not necessarily as horrible as it sounds, that there's manipulation going on. It is out of that need to feel loved, which is normal and human, right? So don't be too hard on yourself if you're recognizing that, oh, I'm doing this, I'm helping, and I'm caring for other people because if I don't think that they're going to care about me anymore. That's human, right? So all of these things, we all have the weaknesses, we all have those things that are driving us. What's important is for you to really take in this information and acknowledge it. You can go from there. So we have Mother Teresa, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Princess Diana as the helper. And obviously we know about Mother Teresa and all of the things that she does for other people. What most people don't really realize, though, with Mother Teresa, she was actually pretty severely depressed. And why I mention that is because her internal part that was caring for herself wasn't as strong as you would think. Most people would assume that if she's doing all of these things for other people, that she feels quite wonderful about herself. Well, that doesn't always go hand in hand. And so that's where, just being in tune with the fact that helping other people and caring for other people might not actually be the answer. It can be really wonderful, it can be really distracting, and it can be fulfilling, but it might not be, you might not be solving the problem that you're experiencing internally. Let's move on to the achiever. So the strength of the achiever is ambitious, adaptable, and confident. The weakness is competitive, workaholic, and image conscious. So that ambitious part, that's obviously a strength, to be thinking about what is going to get me to the next level. What's my next step as a person, as a worker, as a parent? what are my goals? So they're very focused in on their goals. Also very adaptable. So if something comes at them, they're able to figure it out quickly what to do, which is a real asset. And they tend to be very confident. And the confidence is typically based on achievements, which in some ways might not be so positive, but in other ways, that is how we do gain confidence. Confidence is earned to a certain degree, right? Like if you are learning piano, you're not going to feel confident at the beginning, but hopefully after 5 years of practice, you'll feel confident in being able to play a song. I'm exaggerating how how that might look in a way where most people would probably be able to play more than one song. But the weakness is being competitive, tend to be a workaholic and image conscious. So they care a lot about how they look in people's eyes. And this can be obviously an issue with something. If they lose their job, if something goes wrong, this can be devastating to the achiever. Their greatest desire is achieving success and recognition. So they basically are equating success to love. So nobody could not love me because I'm number one at this. So recognizing, if you're an achiever, recognizing that that's what's probably happening underneath. Greatest fear is failing or being seen as a failure. So anytime that there is a potential fail, what might happen for the achiever is they might deny its existence. They might avoid doing that particular thing because they don't think they're going to be good at it. And so one of the things, if I'm working with an achiever, that I ask them to do is be bad at something. Go out, let go of the image consciousness and just do something and see how you feel. It might not feel so great. It might be fun, but doing an experiment like that can really help us see, who we are and what's showing up, and can help us to move through it and move past it. So tendency again to be hardworking, organized, and efficient. The negative side, like I'd mentioned, that there can be some self-critical stuff going on as well, prone to perfectionism, just like the one is. Now, sometimes those can be confusing. What you want to go back to between the 1 and the 3 is if you are being perfectionistic about yourself. Is it because you think this is the right thing to do, or is it because you want to look a certain way in front of others? So just keeping that in mind of what is driving that. The other piece that I think is vital to talk about is how the 3 is within a relationship. They tend to be focused on success and goals. So sometimes they might not be as close to their partner as their partner wants. They can be, again, they can really lean on their image. And if that's not working well, it can be really difficult. It can bring up depression, low self-esteem. So those in the achiever spots, we have Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey, and Elon Musk. So each of these individuals, now Oprah, I think I have her in another one because she does kind of fit another area as well. But the reality with the achiever is that they tend to be, again, very goal focused, hard workers, and need to continue to achieve. And again, like if that's not there, it can be really difficult. Type 4, so this is the last in the subgroup. Strengths: creative, introspective, and empathetic. Weaknesses: moody, self-absorbed, and envious. So they might be in that creative space. So spending a lot of time thinking and expressing their different creative forces. The weaknesses: they tend to be moody and reason for that is, there is that tendency to let the feelings drive them. And so it might look as though they're not trying to control any of those things. Tends to be, there's a tendency for that self-absorbed piece. And if you think about it, that's in some ways really needed for some creative energy. They have to be focused on themselves when they're in that space, just not all the time. Greatest desire, finding an authentic identity and significance. So do I matter? Do I matter in this world? Do I matter in this relationship? Greatest fear is having no identity or significance. So individuals are introspective, expressive, and creative. Individualists are introspective, expressive, and creative. They have a unique perspective on the world and a keen sense for beauty and authenticity, making them excellent artists and designers. Where this can be an issue is if they're caught up in their emotions, can lead to mood swings and feeling very misunderstood. For therapy, this comes up. Sometimes people come in because they're feeling misunderstood by family and friends. And they might have a tendency to romanticize certain things, might look back on past relationships in a way that's overly positive. And think about, what am I missing in my life, and really be very affected by that. So some examples are Kurt Cobain, Vincent van Gogh. You have to be really in touch with your moods, right, when you are in that field. But it can sometimes take the best. It can take the best people and really put them in a bad situation, just because of the pain piece. And they go kind of towards it to some degree and live in it a bit differently than, let's say, a 7, which, we'll get to in a moment, but 7s really do more of the avoiding, and the 4s go kind of into it. Going into the 5, the strengths: analytic, innovative, and perceptive. The weaknesses are detached, isolated, and overly private. So they tend to be people that are really centered around thinking and cognition. And they've also, the weaknesses tend to be that they tend to be really, in more of an extreme way, introverted. There's plenty of people that aren't 5s that are introverted, that just feel like they need a break and their energy gets restored by time alone. But the investigators almost just needs that in a higher level. So they might really keep themselves very private and protected. Their greatest desire is to understand the world and having knowledge. The more, the better. But their greatest fear is being helpless or incapable. So the idea behind it is really taking that, taking knowledge and using it as a way to protect themselves. If I know more, if I only knew more, I could figure this out. Sometimes that's not the case. Investigators are perceptive, innovative, and curious. Let me say that again. Investors are perceptive, innovative, and curious. They have a deep thirst for knowledge and the ability to focus intensely on their interests, making them excellent thinkers and researchers. So this piece is relevant because if you're curious about a different topic, you're going to be invested in it. You're going to want to spend a lot of time in that space. And that's what the 5s do pretty frequently. That's where they live. They live in that space of, I want to know more. I want to figure more things out. I want to understand, and let's get deeper in this topic. Where this can be a problem is the isolation. They isolate in order to conserve their energy, but again, it isn't a high level. And they might struggle with practical matters and like how to actually implement different ideas versus talking about ideas, and might be perceived as distant or detached. So Bill Gates is an example of an investigator, and that, I mean, you got to be in that role when you're carrying around all those books all the time, I would imagine. Pretty easy to spot that out. But just understanding that is how they feel safest. Again, if I know something, that's going to help me move through the world. So that connection is really vital to understanding somebody in that space. It's not necessarily that they're trying to purposefully detach and be removed. It is that that's where they're feeling most comfortable and safest. Obviously that can be hard with a partner that's in that space, but figuring out how to connect with those areas could be useful. Okay, so we have 2 left, and not a ton of time left, so let's get to it. Type 6, the loyalist. So strengths are loyal, responsible, and prepared. Weaknesses, anxiousness, suspicious, and indecisive. And their greatest desire is feeling secure and supported. So they want to make sure that they are safe. Just like the 5, safety is at the forefront. And their greatest fear is being without support or guidance. So this might be somebody that's questioning things quite often about, how do I know? Is this the right path? I want somebody to just tell me what to do here. They tend to be really a hard nut to crack when you're first meeting them. But as you start to get to know them, they will open up. And once they trust you, they will trust you, which is a pretty amazing feeling on the other end. So this is somebody that maybe took years, like within your group, took years to be able to open up to you and starts to, and then you can realize like, oh, wow, this person has so much to offer. And now that they feel safe with me, that relationship can be pretty incredible. Loyalists are responsible, trustworthy, and reliable. They do have that strong sense of duty and the ability to anticipate problems. So they're the ones that might, whenever you might be implementing something new, they will be the ones that'll bring up like, what if this, what if that? And that hopefully is seen in a work environment as a really positive thing. They can be really great at advising and, use a lot of different risk management type positions can also be really important, or I'm sorry, risk management positions can also be a really good fit because their tendency is to find those things out. They want to look at everything to make sure they are feeling safe. So one of the negative sides to a 6 is they do tend to be anxious and doubtful. So they're typically planning for the worst case scenario. They might become dependent on others for reassurance and struggle with decision making. So that might be somebody that's waffling for quite a bit about what decision that they might need to make. And let's see. So Ellen, pretty famous loyalist. So tends to be really, looking at her personality, she tends to be pretty skeptical of, but then also when she connects with somebody, there is that sense of loyalty there. All right, last one, last but definitely not least, the type 7, which is the enthusiast. So in a nutshell, the enthusiast is that person that's a lot of fun. They're spontaneous, optimistic, versatile. They are going to be ready for anything. Their weaknesses tend to be that they're impulsive and scattered. They are trying to avoid pain at all costs. So that having a really intimate, challenging conversation with them is not going to work very well typically. So you got to be careful how you're approaching a topic, because they will just not show up if they know that they're going to have a conversation that's negative. Not all sevens do this, let me just say, but there is a very strong instinct to avoid that pain. They will be more of the individuals that like to get everything that they can out of life. Their greatest desire is fulfillment, experiencing happiness and fulfillment. So they're always, always looking to go towards pleasure. That is their main direction that they're looking at. So why this can be so wonderful as a partner is they're going to do that for you. If your partner is an enthusiast, they're going to show you a good time. You don't have to worry, okay, is today going to be fun? Are we going to have a good conversation? Because yes, you will. The greatest fear, though, is being deprived or trapped in pain. So this person might have some struggles when you are in pain. They might tend to back away from you or try to shift focus and distract you by making a joke or let's go do this, take your mind off of it. But they're typically not going to be the person that's sitting with you in that pain. It's just too uncomfortable for them. Again, they're versatile, optimistic, zest for life. And then their negatives going into that impulsivity, struggle to commit, and they have a tendency to overextend themselves because they want to get every single fun thing done. So examples, the best one is Jim Carrey. I mean, he's a pretty thoughtful guy. And so I don't, when we're going through these types, it's not that you are going to be lacking that thoughtfulness, but there is going to be that tendency to entertain or take someone's mind off of the pain. All right. So lastly, I want to thank everybody for attending. And again, this is just an overview of the Enneagram, just giving you a quick idea of what the Enneagram is and going through each of those parts. If you would like more information, please reach out and I can share with you some other additional resources. And if you could take some time to review us on Google reviews, I can't begin to tell you how important and valuable that is. That's how people find us. That's how people find counseling and free resources, is through our Google reviews. So if you have a few minutes, that would be extremely wonderful if you did that. And most people struggle with like what to write. You don't have to write a lot. You can just write, I enjoyed the presentation. I felt like I learned something from the presentation. Lori's a nice person, that sort of thing. Doesn't have to be this long-winded rating. And in all honesty, you don't even have to say anything, but typically words do help the rating. It means more if you do have something written. All right. Thanks again for your time, and I hope to see you soon.